I'll never forget the first time I set foot in that house. It was supposed to be just another weekend getaway. Something simple. But what happened there has haunted me ever since. And I'm still not sure how I managed to make it out alive. It started with an Airbnb listing. I had been working non-stop for months and just needed a break. I was in my mid-30s, living in New York City, and I'd rented places all over the world before. Nothing ever strange. Nothing ever out of the ordinary. But this time was different. The listing seemed perfect. The photos were beautifully lit. The cottage was secluded and surrounded by forests. And it was only a 2-hour drive from where I was staying. The host, someone named Greg, had glowing reviews. No complaints, nothing odd in the comments. He seemed like a regular guy. His profile picture was just a normal smiling face wearing a baseball cap. Everything about it screamed, safe getaway. I clicked the booking button and received a prompt response. Greg thanked me for choosing his place and mentioned that he'd left a key under the doormat. Standard stuff, nothing to raise suspicion. I was excited to finally get away from the hustle and bustle of the city. Little did I know, this trip would be anything but ordinary. The drive was easy. I arrived just after dusk, the fading sunlight casting eerie shadows over the tree-lined road leading up to the house. When I pulled up to the driveway, I realized that the place was more isolated than I'd anticipated. There were no other houses for miles, just dense forest on all sides. I found the key exactly where Greg had said it would be, under the mat. But as I unlocked the door, something didn't feel quite right. The air was stale, like the house hadn't been opened in a while, but that wasn't unusual for a vacation rental. Stepping inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The house was eerily quiet, almost too quiet. The only sound was the distant rustle of the wind through the trees. I figured it was just nerves, nothing more. But then I noticed it. On the coffee table, there was a small handwritten note with my name on it. Welcome. I've left the lights on for you. Make yourself at home. Greg. That was odd. I hadn't mentioned what time I would be arriving, and the lights weren't just on. They were glaringly bright, like someone had been waiting for me. A chill ran down my spine. I shrugged it off. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. That night, as I settled into bed, the weirdness only grew. The house creaked in the silence, louder than it should have. Every time the wind howled, I could hear something else. A faint, scraping sound coming from above. At first, I thought it was just the house settling. But then it came again. A slow, deliberate sound as though something heavy was being dragged across the floor above me. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination. But the longer I listened, the more I felt that I was not alone in that house. Before I could fall asleep, I checked my phone for messages from Greg. Nothing. Just the usual notification from Airbnb confirming my check-in. But that's when I saw it. In the corner of the message thread, there was a new notification. One I hadn't noticed before. It was a message from Greg. But it wasn't meant for me. Don't let them in. They've found you. I froze, staring at the screen in disbelief. I scrolled through the chat history. There was no such message from Greg. The text was out of place, and I hadn't received it earlier. The blood drained from my face. What did it mean? Who was they? I didn't sleep that night. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to grow longer with every creak of the house. I couldn't stop thinking about that message. Don't let them in. They found you. It was clear now. Something was off about Greg's house. But what was it? Who were they, and what did Greg mean by that warning? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a glitch in the app. Maybe Greg had sent the wrong message to the wrong person. But deep down, I knew better. Felt real. I tossed and turned in bed for hours, unable to shake the feeling that someone was watching me from the shadows. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a restless sleep. When I woke up the next morning, I felt like I hadn't rested at all. My body was sore, my head heavy. I couldn't shake the unease that had settled deep in my chest. I grabbed a cup of coffee from the small kitchen, trying to ground myself. I needed to get out of the house, take a walk, clear my mind. But the moment I stepped outside, things got even worse. The sun had risen, but there was something strange about the daylight. The trees were unnaturally still, the air thick and oppressive. The house seemed even more isolated than before. No neighbors, no cars passing by, just endless forest. I walked around the back of the house, hoping the fresh air would help. The ground was wet, as if it had rained the night before, though I hadn't heard anything. But then I stopped. Something caught my eye near the edge of the woods, just outside the tree line. It was a figure, a person standing still and staring directly at me. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, my hand tightening around the coffee mug, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move. It was too far away for me to make out any details, but I knew it was watching me closely. I blinked, and when I looked back, the figure was gone, vanished. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog from my brain. I was losing it. It had to be my imagination. There was no one out there. I turned to head back inside, but as I did, my foot caught on something in the grass. I looked down. There, half buried in the wet earth, was a small, torn piece of paper. I bent down to pick it up, my stomach tightening with dread. The paper was old, crinkled, but the writing was still legible. It read, "They know you're here. Don't trust anyone. It's too late to run." My blood ran cold. This couldn't be happening. Who had left this here? Was someone stalking me? I hurried back into the house, locking the door behind me. My hands trembled as I put the note on the kitchen counter. I tried to make sense of it, but nothing added up. I was alone, in a remote house with no one else around, and yet someone knew I was here. Then there was a knock at the door. It was soft at first, almost hesitant, but it was there. My breath caught in my throat again. I slowly approached the door, trying to peer through the peephole, but all I could see was a vague shape. I couldn't make out any details, no face, no features. I asked, in a shaky voice, "Hello?" No answer, just more knocking. I waited, heart pounding in my chest, but it felt like hours before the knocking stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse than the sound of the knock itself. I didn't know what to do. Was this Greg? Had he returned? Or was it someone else? I decided to text Greg, hoping for some kind of explanation, but my phone screen froze. I tried restarting it, but nothing worked. My phone was dead, completely unresponsive. That's when I heard it, the same scraping sound from last night, now coming from inside the walls. Something or someone was inside the house. I stood there, frozen in terror, as the scraping sound grew louder. It was coming from within the walls, slow, deliberate, almost like claws dragging along the plaster. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I quickly backed away from the door, every instinct screaming at me to run. But where could I go? The house was isolated, surrounded by nothing but forest. I had no cell service, no way of contacting anyone. I was completely cut off. I grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I knew it wouldn't do much if someone or something was already inside, but it was all I had. The scraping stopped for a moment, replaced by silence. It felt like the calm before the storm, a sickening stillness that made my heart race even faster. I waited. My breath was shallow, my ears straining for any sound. Every shadow seemed to move. Every creak of the house felt like it was building toward something horrible. Then the doorbell rang. It was a sudden, sharp sound that pierced the silence like a knife. I jumped, nearly dropping the knife in my hand. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Maybe it was someone who had gotten lost. Maybe they had a phone and could help me. But when I peeked through the peephole, my stomach dropped. There was no one standing at the door. It was just an empty porch, the steps leading up to the house deserted. I stepped back, confused. What was happening? My mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything. But then I saw it on the doormat. A single red rose, perfectly placed, like it had been waiting for me. I rushed over to the door, my hand trembling as I picked it up. There was no note, no explanation, just the rose. But something about it felt wrong. My skin crawled as I realized that it had been placed there after the knocking that came from nowhere. Suddenly, the lights flickered. It was brief, just a quick blink, but it was enough to make me feel like the walls were closing in on me. I rushed to the kitchen, my eyes scanning every corner of the room, every shadow. There was no escape. I couldn't just leave. I didn't know what was out there, or worse, who was out there. And then, as if on cue, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps from upstairs. Slow, deliberate steps moving from one room to the next. I froze, staring at the stairs. Whoever or whatever was in this house with me was getting closer. My thoughts raced. I had to find a way out. The back door was locked, and I didn't have a clear view of the windows. But if I could just get to the car. I made my way toward the front door, knife still in hand, but as I reached for the handle, I heard a voice. It wasn't Greg's voice, and it wasn't any voice I recognized. It was a low whisper, barely audible, but it chilled me to the bone. "Don't open the door." I turned toward the sound, my heart hammering in my chest. But there was no one there. I pulled the door open anyway, taking a deep breath. My gaze swept across the porch, the driveway, the trees beyond. The emptiness felt suffocating. But then I saw something. At the far edge of the driveway, a figure stood. Tall, lanky, its face obscured by the shadows, but I could feel its eyes on me. It wasn't moving, just standing there, staring, watching. The figure didn't approach, but I could feel the weight of its gaze, burning into me. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to close the door, to lock myself inside. But my legs wouldn't move. My mind was paralyzed, trapped in that moment of terror. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. It was gone. But the terror didn't end there. The scraping sound from the walls resumed, now much closer, louder. It felt like the walls themselves were breathing. And then came the final realization that broke me. I wasn't alone anymore. I slammed the door shut, locking it with shaking hands. My breath came in shallow, frantic gasps as I backed away from the entrance, the knife still clutched tightly in my grip. The footsteps upstairs grew louder, more deliberate, as though someone was pacing back and forth, just out of sight. But there was no one that I could see. I ran to the back of the house, hoping against hope that I could find a way out. But there was nothing, no escape. The windows were locked tight, and the door at the rear of the house was bolted. I was trapped. Every part of me screamed for help, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized there was no one to help. No one for miles. No neighbors. No cell service. I was alone with whatever haunted this place. I heard a loud bang upstairs, like something heavy had been thrown across the room. My heart leaped into my throat. I didn't know whether to run or hide, but my body refused to move. Every instinct told me to leave, but fear kept me rooted in place. The scraping continued, now punctuated by what sounded like muffled whispers. They were low, garbled, unintelligible, but unmistakably human. The kind of voices that slithered into your brain and made you doubt your sanity. Don't let them in. Don't trust anyone. The message from Greg. Was it a warning? A cry for help? Or was it part of something much darker? I couldn't stand it anymore. I grabbed the phone from the kitchen counter, desperate to make a call, but the screen was still black. The battery was completely dead, as if something or someone had drained it on purpose. Panic gripped me like a vice. I was utterly helpless. Then, as though some unseen force was taunting me, the doorbell rang again. Slow, deliberate chimes, 3 of them. My blood ran cold, the same as before. No one was out there. I couldn't see anyone, but I could feel them. I knew they were watching me. I stepped toward the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the knob. And that's when I heard it. The faintest sound, like a whisper right behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. Whispering, "We know you're here." I looked around frantically. The house felt alive now, as though the walls themselves were closing in on me. The whispers grew louder, now overlapping with one another, as if I were surrounded by hundreds of voices, each one colder than the last. I dashed for the stairs, desperate to find the source. Maybe there was a way out. Maybe Greg had left some sort of clue, some explanation. But as I reached the top of the stairs, something caught my eye. There, standing in the hallway, was the same figure I'd seen outside earlier. Tall, dark, and unblinking. It didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me with empty eyes. I froze, my heart thundering in my chest. The figure didn't speak. It didn't make a sound. But it was there. It was real. And it was waiting for me. A sudden, cold realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The figure wasn't trying to hurt me. It was waiting for me to make the first move. In that moment, everything clicked. The warning messages, the strange happenings, the eerie silence that had followed me since I arrived. I wasn't meant to be here. The house, the figure, it wasn't about Greg. It was about me. I had walked straight into something I didn't understand. Something dark and ancient that had been lying in wait. The house was a trap, and I had fallen right into it. With my heart in my throat, I made a decision. I had to act fast. I turned on my heel, sprinting down the hallway, not caring about the footsteps behind me. Whether they were real or imagined, I just had to get out. I stumbled down the stairs, my pulse pounding in my ears. The front door was my only option now. I couldn't stay here for another minute. When I reached the door, I hesitated. I looked back, and that's when I saw it. The shadow, it wasn't just one figure anymore. There were more, dozens of them, emerging from the walls, the floors, like they were made from the very house itself. Their faces were indistinguishable, melted into the dark corners of the room. They were everywhere. The door was right in front of me. I could see the sunlight outside, the open air, freedom. But there was no way I was getting out. Not like this. Suddenly, everything shifted. The house seemed to groan, as though it were alive in a way that was wrong. The floor beneath me shifted, and the door rattled violently, as if it were about to slam shut. I knew in that moment I was trapped. The house wasn't just a place. It was something alive. It had chosen me. It was feeding off my fear, and it wasn't going to let me go. Then, just as I was about to give in to the darkness that had surrounded me, I heard a familiar voice. It was Greg's. "I'm sorry. You shouldn't have come." And that was the last thing I heard before the house swallowed me whole. I woke up in darkness. At first, I thought I had blacked out, that maybe I'd passed out from fear or exhaustion. But the moment I opened my eyes, I knew something was horribly wrong. My body felt heavy, as though I were sinking into something cold and suffocating. The air was thick, damp, and smelled like earth and mildew. Felt like I was lying in the dirt. I tried to move, but I couldn't. My limbs were paralyzed, my body unresponsive. Panic surged through me as I struggled, but it felt as though something was holding me down. Then I heard it again, the scraping. But this time, it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from beneath me. I turned my head, but all I saw was black. And then, like a slow drip of cold water, a light flickered above me. I blinked rapidly, trying to adjust to the faint glow. It was dim, but enough to reveal the floor beneath me. And the truth. I was lying in a small, confined space. A hole, dirt and debris surrounding me. A faint smell of rot in the air. It wasn't just any hole, though. This was no grave. It was part of something bigger. A whispering voice crept into my ears. "You're not supposed to be here. You were warned." I froze. That voice. It wasn't just Greg. It was something else. Someone, the same entity that had been watching me, waiting for me. It was everywhere. The house, the walls, the very air I breathed. I forced myself to sit up, my heart hammering in my chest. My body felt like lead, heavy and slow. And that's when I saw it. The truth of what had happened. The hole was in the basement, the room I hadn't even known existed. But there was no way out, no escape. The walls were too steep to climb. I tried scratching at the earth beneath me, but it was useless. My fingers scraped against the dirt, desperate, but I could feel something shift. The ground was alive, like it was pulsing under my touch. The scraping sound grew louder, coming from all sides, as if the house itself was coming alive, clawing at me. The whispers intensified, swirling around me like a storm. "You should have left. You're never leaving. The house has claimed you." I gasped. My mind was racing. This was it, the thing that Greg had been trying to warn me about. He hadn't left me a message to protect me. He had been trying to stop me from walking into the trap. But it was too late. I was the prey. My body refused to move. I was paralyzed in the dirt, trapped by the very force that had consumed Greg. I tried shouting, screaming for help, but my voice was swallowed by the thick silence, muffled by the layers of earth around me. I wanted to die. I wanted to be anywhere but here. And then, through the gloom, a form appeared. A figure. No, not just a figure. A silhouette. But it wasn't human. It was tall, looming, dark. A mass of writhing shadows, twisted and misshapen. Its face like a mask of torment. It didn't move. It didn't need to. It was the thing that had been in the house with me, the thing I had sensed from the moment I arrived. It wasn't Greg. It wasn't anyone I knew. It was the entity, and it was here to finish what had started. The figure loomed over me, its presence suffocating, its hollow eyes staring into mine. The whispers grew louder, more chaotic. You belong to us now. A sudden realization hit me like a freight train. I wasn't trapped in the house anymore. I was trapped in its world, its dimension. This house was just the portal. It was an anchor, a place where the entity lured its prey. And once it had you, it never let you go. I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the nightmare. But I couldn't escape. And that's when I felt it. The cold, clammy fingers dragging me, pulling me deeper into the earth. I wasn't just going to die. I was going to be consumed, forever. And no one would ever know what had happened to me. The house would have another victim, and the cycle would continue. That was when I realized the true horror of Airbnb. It wasn't about the house or the host. It was about the thing waiting for people like me to wander in to become its next meal. And as I was swallowed by the dark, I understood with chilling clarity. I was never meant to leave. I don't know how much time passed. I don't know if it was hours, days, or even weeks. Time seemed irrelevant in that place. The walls, if you could even call them walls, closed in tighter, suffocating me. Every attempt to move, to scream, to escape felt like I was fighting against an invisible force. I had become part of the house. It was as if the house itself knew me now, knew my fear. The whispers never stopped. They grew more personal, more twisted, their voices scratching at the back of my mind. Some of them sounded like Greg, his voice low and desperate, others like something far older, more malicious. You're ours now, forever. The house, it will never let you go. I didn't know how long I stayed trapped in that hole, in the suffocating dirt and shadows. The worst part was that I couldn't even die. It wasn't just that I was stuck in the house. The house had begun to consume me, every part of me. The pain, the terror, the hopelessness. It was all feeding the house, making it stronger. And as I lay there, paralyzed, it occurred to me. The house wasn't just a place. It was a living entity. I was starting to lose my mind. The whispers, the scratching, the creaking. Everything began to bleed together. But the worst part felt like I had always been there. Like the house had been waiting for me. That the moment I entered the front door, it had already claimed me. I wasn't alone anymore. It was everywhere. The figure, the thing that had been lurking in the shadows, reappeared. It stood over me, towering, its face a mask of agony, its eyes hollow and black. It wasn't just one thing anymore. It was hundreds, thousands. They were all around me. Faces, eyes, limbs, all writhing and twisting in the darkness. All of them watching, waiting for their turn. We always get what we want. And then, just as I thought I might lose my mind entirely, the ground trembled. The house groaned, its very foundation cracking. The walls around me began to warp, stretching and bending in unnatural ways. The ceiling, the earth itself, was breaking apart, revealing something far worse than I could ever imagine. It wasn't the basement anymore. It was an abyss. The abyss of the house, stretching endlessly beneath me, pulling me down into its darkness. I tried to scream, but no sound came. I tried to move, but it was as if my body had stopped existing. And then, something strange happened. The shadows began to retreat. The presence, the entity, it was leaving. The whispers fell silent. For a fleeting moment, everything went still. I could see the house as it truly was, a hollow shell. The walls that had once contained me, now empty and decaying. The twisted, rotting essence of whatever lived inside it was fading. But just as I thought I might be freed, I felt it. A tug, like a hand reaching from the deep to pull me back into the darkness. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. And that's when I realized there was no escape. The house wouldn't let me go. I was never supposed to leave. The moment I stepped inside, I had become part of it. My essence, my soul, was bound to the house forever. And the worst part was knowing that the house was still hungry. It had tasted me. It wanted more. Anyone else who dared to step inside, they would become the next offering. I was never meant to leave, and now neither would they. I wish I could tell you that I fought back, that I found a way to escape, but there's no redemption here. The house had already claimed me, and now it's only a matter of time before someone else, another victim, finds themselves in the same hell I did. The walls of the house are alive, pulsing like the heartbeat of some ancient, malevolent thing. The whispers have become louder, more insistent, and now they speak not just to me, but to everyone who steps inside. Each guest is marked, a mark that the house never forgets. The worst part is you don't even see it coming. It's never obvious. It's never some horror movie monster lurking in the shadows, ready to strike. No, it's much more insidious. It's the house itself. The structure, the very foundation, is alive. It watches, waits, and bides its time until the moment is right. The thing that haunted me the most after all of this, the thing I can never shake, is the faces, the other souls trapped in this house. They're not just figures, not just whispers. They're real. I see them now, walking through the house, lost in their own suffering. Greg is among them. I know it. I see him sometimes, his face twisted with despair. The same hopelessness I felt when I first stepped inside. But there are more. So many more. They move through the house, trying to make sense of what happened to them. They try to find a way out, but they know it's useless. The house won't let you leave. The moment you step inside, you are marked for eternity. You may not know it yet, but the house knows. It feeds on your fear, your confusion, your desperation, and when it's ready, it takes everything. You are never really you again. You become part of it, part of the house. Your soul, your essence, woven into its walls. I've tried to warn others. There's an old book in the house, hidden in the attic, filled with accounts of those who came before. There are names, dates, descriptions, all the victims who fell into the same trap I did. I tried to reach out, tried to warn people through the Airbnb app, but no one listens. The house knows how to silence you. It erases you, makes sure you're forgotten, your existence fading away like a bad memory. But now I know the truth. The house isn't just a place, it's a predator. And just like any predator, it learns. It adapts. It waits for the next one to enter its doors, unsuspecting, ready to feast. And so the cycle continues. The house calls to others, drawing them in like moths to a flame. And once they're inside, they're never truly free. It doesn't matter if you escape the physical house. You're never free from it, and neither am I, because the truth is the house will always win. You'll always be its guest. Did you like these stories? Write in the comments. And please write what you didn't like. It will be useful for me to know your opinion. And I will improve my work. Thank you. Subscribe to my channel and click the bell so as not to miss new stories. I try for you.